Morning and good evening, everyone, whichever part of the world you are joining us, and welcome to VizConnect, connecting you with the art of data visualization and storytelling. VizConnect is all about how we can go ahead and create a platform and learn from each other. So it started as a community project with one of the Tableau ambassadors in India, Divya Bharti, and now along with Adam, Nico, and Anusius. And last week we completed our 1 year, so it has been a great journey just to go ahead and connect people with the art of data visualization and storytelling. So far we have done close to 36 sessions, 41 speakers, 6,000 attendees so far, and 900 plus subscribers on our YouTube channel. We have a great LinkedIn group. Go ahead and connect to each other and learn from each other. And this has been possible with the help of our amazing community who were kind enough to go ahead and share their best practices and learning with the community. So great feedbacks around why VizConnect, right? And that's great to see what impact we are creating in going ahead and helping our community members to enhance their skills in data visualization and storytelling. So this is our YouTube page. Just go ahead, subscribe to it. Some amazing content waiting for you. As I was talking about, this is our LinkedIn page. Go ahead, join this LinkedIn group. Some amazing content waiting for you. Just go ahead and learn from each other, connect with each other. So we are a data company. We want to understand how exactly VizConnect as a whole is creating an impact, right? So you can see over here, people are joining us from across the world. Close to 52% of the people have been on VizConnect before. And the one thing which is important to me is that just to track and help people to understand the importance of Tableau public profile. It's great to say that 63% of the people, they have a Tableau public profile. And our today's speaker, he will talk about why you need a Tableau profile and how it can help you with your data visualization and storytelling journey. With that, I will hand it over to Adam to introduce our speaker for today.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to share Brian Moore. He's been a previous collaborator of mine on Vizes and blogs and a good friend to me and the entire community. So I'm excited to share him with you today. His session name is going to be Building Better Business Dashboards Through Interactivity. And the description of the session is that Brian will be demonstrating a variety of tips and tricks for building interactive business dashboards designed to better engage your audience. The tips in this session will vary in complexity, but between the demonstrations and supporting materials, Tableau users of any skill level will be able to implement them with ease. Brian's biography is that he's a senior data visualization and analytics consultant with Clear Intelligence, Inc. Co-leader of the Boston Tableau user group, a co-leader of the STG Viz project, a data visualization mentor to several members of the Tableau community, and all-around Tableau fanatic. He has been using Tableau for about 6 years, but his involvement in the community has been for the past year. Fun fact about Brian is that he once bowled a 300 game. And without further ado, here's Brian.
Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for tuning in to VizConnect, and thank you, Adam, for that wonderful introduction. Today, we're going to be talking about building better dashboards through interactivity. So Tableau has some incredibly powerful tools for interacting with your data, and I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks for leveraging those tools to design dashboards that are more flexible, more engaging, more powerful, and really just a lot more fun to use. So at some point, I'm sure we've all been in a requirements meeting that looks something like this. Some of your stakeholders want a high-level overview showing the overall state of the business. Others want a ton of detail and 100 different cuts of the data to be able to answer very specific questions. And oftentimes what you end up with is just a monstrosity that has 15 dashboards that takes weeks or even months to build. And a short while later, you find out that nobody's actually using it. It's too busy and complex for the people that wanted a high-level summary, for the people that wanted a lot of detail. The questions they were trying to answer a month ago aren't the same questions they're trying to answer now. I'm a huge proponent of self-service analytics. So rather than building somebody a dashboard that kind of explicitly answers the questions I have now, I'd rather provide them with a tool that they can use to look up answers to those questions and other questions that might arise in the future. And that's kind of what this session is about today. So tips and tricks for building really flexible dashboards. And I'll touch on a few other tips and tricks along the way. Here's a pretty dashboard that we'll use for today's session, and we'll start with just a quick demo. So first off, we can filter the entire dashboard with these two bar charts on the left here. So I can click on a region to filter the dashboard. I can also click on a subcategory. And using actions to filter your dashboard not only looks a lot nicer than quick filters, but it's much better for performance and provides just a generally more satisfying user experience. There are several methods you can use for doing this. You can use filter actions, parameter actions, set actions. I tend to use either parameter actions or set actions because they give you a little bit more flexibility in how you can use those selected values. And the deciding factor between the two is typically whether I want to be able to select a single value, in which case I would use a parameter, or if I want to be able to select multiple values, in which case I would use a set. So there are ways to build multi-set parameters, but that's kind of beyond what we're going to cover today. So for this dashboard, I went with parameter actions. You'll also notice that when I click on one of these marks, you don't get that kind of weird default highlighting that happens in Tableau. Instead, the unselected marks just kind of fade into the background. So I'll show you how to do that as well. This next section is kind of the meat of the presentation. So this is the trick that can really add some flexibility to your dashboards. And it's related to these bands across the top. So I use bands all the time in my business dashboards to give a quick, prominent view of the metric totals. I usually like to include some kind of growth indicator as well to give some kind of context to that number. So here we have these little up and down arrows with the percent growth. You can also use these bands to drive actions throughout your dashboard, so you can deep dive into each individual metric. So when I click on one of these bands, you'll notice a few things happen. First, you'll see that the color for the selected band changes. So when I click on profit, this band will turn blue, all of the other ones turn gray. You'll also see this label change. So on the selected one, it'll say that you're viewing that metric. So this says viewing sales. When I click on a different metric, that's going to flip to say click to view sales. That gives some instruction to your user to say click on this to change it. Next, you'll see that the metric being measured in all of the views changes. So when I click on sales, you'll see we have sales by region, sales by subcategory, over time, by state, by manufacturer. When I click on profit, all of those are going to flip to measuring profit. Same thing with units sold and on-time shipment percentages. And then the last thing you'll notice is that this chart here actually changes depending on which of these KPIs is selected. So if I select any of these first three metrics, we have this kind of small multiple area chart. If I click on this last one, we have this kind of sparkline chart. So in addition to showing you how to set all of that up, I'll also go over a couple of quick tips for calculating and displaying this period growth. Next, we have these little arrows down here that'll allow you to scroll through the records in the view. You see here we have the first 10 records. You hit the button to go to the next 10, the next 10, and so on. When you have a dimension that has a lot of values, displaying them all with a scroll bar can really, really hurt performance. So a common practice is typically to limit the results to the top N, which in this case is the top 10 records. But what if you want to see the next 10 or the 10 after that or the 10 after that? So using these scroll buttons will allow you to view 10 records at a time without hurting your performance. Personally, I think it also just looks a lot nicer than a scroll bar. And again, provides just generally a much more satisfying user experience. And then finally, anytime you're building a dashboard with a lot of interactivity, it's really, really important that your users know how to use it. So that's a huge barrier for adoption and one of the more common causes for low usage on a dashboard, just not knowing how the dashboard works. So training is very important, but you may not always be available to train new users or to answer questions. So I like to include an instructions overlay, like this one here, that just highlights all the areas of the dashboard that you can interact with. And here you can clearly see what elements you can interact with and the kind of type of reaction the users can expect from those interactions. So that's all I'm going to cover today. This is kind of a baseline model that I use for building flexible dashboards. They can support a lot of different users from different departments and varying levels of the organization. But this is really just a jumping off point. There is so much more that you can add to this to make it even more flexible and more powerful. But we're going to focus on what we have here today. So we have a lot to cover. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to move pretty quickly through these tips, but I will send out a link in the next few days to a blog post that walks through all of these tips in detail. I'll also publish this dashboard. And also just a quick disclaimer, all the tips I'm going to share, there's probably 30, 40 different ways that you can do them in Tableau. I'm just going to share the methods that I typically use. All right, so on to our region view here. To my region worksheet. First, we're going to create a parameter for the region. I've already done that. I'll just show it to you. I just call this region par for parameter. This is going to be a string parameter. I'm going to set the current value to default to all. Hit OK. And now we're going to create a calculated field for the filter. I have a calculated field here called region selected. And this is just going to say that region parameter either equals our default value of all, or it equals a specific region. So this is just a Boolean calc that's going to result in a true if it's set to all or if a single region is selected. All right, then I'm going to go to one of the worksheets that I want to filter. We'll go to this one. I would just drag that region selected field onto filter. Click, go to apply worksheets, and then I'm going to select all of the worksheets that I want to apply that filter to. All right, so now we have the filter in place based on our parameter. Now we need to add a parameter action to actually update that parameter value. I'm going to go to dashboard, actions, I'm going to add an action. This is going to be a parameter action. We'll just give this a name called region select. Now we just want to select the sheet that we're going to use to drive the action, which in this case is going to be this region sheet here. Unfortunately, there's no way to select or deselect all of the worksheets here, but what you can do is click on the top one, scroll down, hold down Shift, click on the bottom one, and you can bulk select or deselect. I'm just going to click off to clear that bulk select, and I'm going to choose just this worksheet here, which is called tip 1 metric by region. The target parameter is going to be that region parameter that we just built, and we want to pass the region value to it. All right, so now when we click on a region, we can see that filters the rest of the dashboard. But we do have a couple of issues still here. We have that weird default highlighting that Tableau does. It's not terribly noticeable in this dashboard because it kind of fits with the color scheme, but a lot of times that's not the case. And also, look what happens when I click on the mark again. So now the dashboard is filtered to the West region, but there's really no way for the user to know that. With parameter actions, unlike filter actions or set actions, you can't just click again to clear the selection, but you can accomplish something very similar with another calculation. I'm going to go back to my worksheet here. I'm going to create one more calculated field. This is going to be called region remove. And this just says, if the region that we click on is already in the region parameter, then we want to set the parameter back to our default of all, which is basically clearing it. Otherwise, pass that region value to the parameter. I'm going to drag that to detail. I'm going to go back to my dashboard action. I'm going to edit my existing action, and I'm going to change the field. Instead of region, I'm going to use the region remove field. Hit OK. So now we can click once to filter the dashboard to a specific region. And then we can click it again to clear that filter. So highlighting happening here. So I'm going to go back to my worksheet. I'm going to create a calculated field called HL, which is just short for highlight. Here, I'm just using a blank value, but this can literally be anything. It can be any text value, any number, just anything that doesn't have any kind of aggregation, and that's going to change based on the row. So I usually just go with a blank. I'm going to drag that to detail. Go back to my dashboard. I'm going to add another action. This is going to be a highlight action. And I'm going to deselect all of these first, and then I'm just going to pick the worksheet that's driving the action. That's this tip 1 metric by region. And then I'm going to select that same one as my target sheet. Under target highlighting, I'm going to click selected fields and then select highlight. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to trick Tableau into highlighting every field in that view instead of just the selected one. So now as I click through the see that it highlights the filter, but it doesn't turn all of the other unselected marks that weird gray color. So we're almost done here. Now we just have one more problem, which is you can't really tell which region is selected, and we're going to use color to remedy that. So I'm going to go back to my worksheet. I'm going to take that region selected field that we built. Hold on one second. I'm just going to filter this. So I'm going to take the region selected that we built previously. I'm going to drag that onto color. For the true value, I'm going to set it to that kind of baseline color, which is just this blue. For the false value, I'm just going to set it to the same color as my background. To do that, I just grabbed a screenshot of the dashboard. I used the color selector tool to get the code for it. And then I just entered that code here directly. And now, when you go to your dashboard, when you have this filtered, the selected mark will retain that blue color. All of the other marks will just kind of fade into the background. And you can follow that same exact process to apply the filter to the subcategory, but I'm just going to move on for the sake of time. All right, now on to our KPI selectors. So there's kind of a lot to these, but I'm going to go through them step by step, starting with just a plain band that just has the total and the label. I'm going to go to my sales band first. First, we want to create a calculated field for each of the bands. And these are going to be really simple. For sales, it's just going to be called sales, and it's just going to be the word sales. Same thing for profit. It's going to be called profit, and it's just going to be the word profit. And we're going to do that for each one of our bands. I have a total of 4. You see there's 4 calculated fields here. Next, we're going to create a parameter for our KPI. So I have a parameter here called metric select. This is going to be a string parameter. You can set the current value to any of these 4 values or any of the values that you have depending on your bands. Typically, you can just use allowable values. You can click on all because you're always going to be passing a value to the parameter. I used a list just because after I built it, I wanted to alias some of the values. So I did that here, but either of those is fine. Next, we're going to create a calculated field that basically represents whatever measure is selected. This is called metric calc. This is just a case statement that says when that metric select parameter equals sales, then I want this calculation to sum sales. When it's profit, I want to sum profit. When it's quantity, I want to sum quantity. And when it's shipping, I want to use this other calculation that I had previously calculated for ship pass rates. All right. Actually, I did skip one step here, so I'm just going to backtrack for a second. On each of our bands, we want to take the calculated field that we had built for sales. We want to take our sales field and drag it to detail. For profit, we want to drag profit to detail. You would do that same thing for all of your bands. I'm just going to focus on these two for now, just for the sake of time. The next thing you're going to do in each one of your worksheets in this view, you're going to have that metric calculation that we had built. That's going to be the calculation that's displayed. So here I have it on columns for the bar length. Same on subcategory. For here, I have it on height. For the area charts, I have it on color here for state. And again, so that's just going to be the displayed view for everything. All right, and lastly, we're going to add a parameter that's going to take those text values that we had and pass them into our parameter. So when I click on this, it's going to take that sales calculation and pass the value sales to our parameter. When I click on this, it's going to take that word profit and pass that to our parameter. I'm going to add an action. We'll just call this sales. Select just my sales band. My target parameter is going to be metric select. I'm going to do that sales calculated field, hit OK. And I'm going to do the same thing for profit. Again, well, that metric select parameter. And when I click on this, I want to pass the word profit. Hit OK. So now when we click on one of these, we'll see that we're able to select the KPI for the entire dashboard. But we're not quite done yet. So when you click on one of these bands, you see the entire view gets this blue highlight, which again, in this dashboard, doesn't look too bad because it kind of fits the color scheme, but that usually won't be the case. In the previous tip, I had shown you how to get rid of that default highlighting, but look what happens when we try to use that on the bands. I'm going to go to Dashboard, Actions. If I try adding a highlight action, I'm going to select both of my bands. My highlight field. So now instead of getting rid of the highlight, it's actually just going to highlight the selected one in blue, and it's going to highlight everything else in yellow, which is not at all what we want. That highlight action works a little differently on text marks. It works great on most views, but it does have some limitations. The two biggest ones I've found so far are on text marks, and it also doesn't work well with area charts. But there is another method that we can apply using filter actions. So I'm going to go to one of my bands here. I'm going to create two calculated fields, and these are just going to be called 0 and 1. 0 is just going to be a 0. 1 is just going to be a 1. I'm going to drag those both to detail. I'm going to do the same on my other band. Then I'm going to add a filter action for each one of my bands. I'm going to go to Actions. First, I'm going to get rid of that highlight action. And I'm going to do a filter action. We'll call it Sales Highlight. Here, I want to select just my sales band. And then rather than selecting that in the target sheet here, we're actually going to do it from the drop-down. Let's hit to and sales. We want to run this action on select. Under target filters, we check selected fields and click add filter. Under the source field, I'm going to choose 1. Under the target field, I'm going to choose, under the source field, I'm going to choose 0. Under the target field, I'm going to choose 1. Hit OK. I'm going to do that same thing one more time for my profit band. We'll select our profit worksheet. We're going to select it from the drop down here. Run it on select, selected fields, choose 0 there, 1 there, hit OK. And now you can click on these without highlighting them. And that method basically works rather than highlighting all of the marks like the previous tip does, this one actually deselects the mark after you click on it. So that comes in handy in a lot of situations. All right, so we've removed the default highlighting, but now you can't really tell which band is selected. So just like before, we're going to use color to remedy that. So for each band, I'm going to create another calculated field that's just a simple Boolean calc. So for sales, it's just going to say that our metric parameter equals sales. For profit, it's just going to be that metric parameter equals profit. And on each of the bands, I'm going to drag the appropriate field of color. You can set the true and false values to whatever you want. In this one, I have the true value set to blue and the false value set to gray. So now when you click on one of these bands, the selected one turns blue and the other ones will turn gray. You can take this step a step further if you hold Control and click on that KPI selected field and drag it to text. Now we have these little labels here as well. So when sales is selected, it says viewing sales. When the other one, everything that's not selected, it'll give this instruction that says click to view. Now you're probably wondering how it's displaying that when it's just a true false Boolean calculation. So to do that, on my sales calculation, if you right click and go to aliases, when this is true, that means the metric parameter is set to sales. We have sales selected. I want that value to display as viewing sales. When it's false, meaning anything else is selected, I want it to display as click to view sales. And I'm going to do that same thing for each of those. So for profit, when profit is selected, it'll say viewing profit. When anything else is selected, it'll say click to view profit. All right, and then kind of one last step to this is I'm just going to click into each one of my headers. I'll double click on it. I'm going to go to insert and I'm going to insert my parameter. And this is just going to give another kind of identification point to say what you're looking at. So you do that for each one. Now it'll say profit by region. When you click on sales, it'll say sales by region. All right. So in my bands, I also typically like to show growth rates. So here's just a couple quick tips around that. I'm not really related to interactivity, but hopefully still helpful. So there are a lot of ways that you can calculate period over period growth, but here's an easy one. So first, I'm going to create a calculated field for the current year or the max year in our data source. And this is going to be an LOD that looks for the max year. I'm using order date. I'm using the Superstore data, so this is going to result in 2019 because it's just full year data from the previous 5 or 6 years. So this is going to return the value of 2019 in every row in our data source. All right, now we're going to create another calculated field. And one second. We're going to create another calculated field, and this is going to filter for the previous and for the current and the previous year. So this is just saying that the year of the order date is greater than equal to 2019 minus 1. So anything from 2018 or 2019, I want to filter to just those records. Now, so this is how you would calculate it for 2 full years. If you were doing month over month or year to date growth, things like that, this calculation right here would get more complicated, but the rest of this process stays exactly the same. All right, and then instead of this, instead of filtering to the current year, the year filter, I'm going to get rid of that. And instead, I'm going to drag my year over year filter and select true. So now we have 2 years worth of data in this view. Now I'm going to do one more calculated field called current year. And this is just testing to see if the data is from the current year or the previous year. So if it's from the current year, in 2019, it's going to be true. If it's from the previous year, it's going to be false. I'm just going to drag that on the columns. So now this is our 2019 data. This is our 2018 data. The reason I used this calculated field instead of the actual years is this will be dynamic. So when we get a new year's worth of data, this will update without us having to go in and change any filters or unhide any data. So now I'm going to right click on false. I'm going to hide that. Also going to hide this header. And by hiding it, instead of filtering it out, it lets us still use that data in a calculation, which filtering out wouldn't let us do that, but we don't have to display it. So I'm going to bring sales onto detail. I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to add a table calculation. And I'm going to say percent difference from across. So this is going to calculate the percent difference from our false value, even though it's not in the view. And then I'm going to drag that up to text. We'll open up the text bar and just do some formatting here. Bring it up here, make it a little bit bigger, a little bit bolder. Now we need to do the number formatting. So I'm going to go to format. Now I could just set this to a percentage. Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry. I could just set this to a percentage. Here we can see there's 20.4% growth, but I really like those up and down arrow indicators. So I'm just going to calculate, grab this from my notes here. Under the number format, I'm going to click on custom, and I'm going to paste in this string. So the first half of this string, everything to the left of this semicolon, determines how positive values are formatted. Everything in this section determines how negative values are formatted. And then if you wanted to, you can add a third section of the string that determines how the value of 0 would be formatted. So the beginning of this gives a prefix, so you can use a plus here. I like to use an upwards facing arrow. And to get that, you would just go, you can search your computer for your character map, which is going to look something like this. Scroll down till you find your up arrow. I'm going to click on it, hit select, and then copy. And then I can paste that right into here. And you can also use that on labels, tooltips. You can use it anywhere that you would use any other character from your keyboard. And then the rest of this just determines how the number is formatted. So I want to format it as a number. It should be a percentage to 1 decimal place. And then you can see here, it's a positive number. So we have that upward facing arrow formatted to 1 decimal place. If there's negative growth, you would see this arrow pointing downward. All right. Now on to the next tip. So now we have our KPI selectors in place, but there's one more issue, and that's the number formatting in all of the views. So most of these should be different formats. So sales and profit are both currency, units sold is a whole number, on-time shipment is a percentage. But on each of our views, if we just drag this metric calc to our label, we can only select one format for that. So by default, this is just going to be an automatic number. So it's just going to be a whole number when you click on any of these. And a decimal when you click on this, which is not really what we want. There are a few ways to dynamically format these labels, but here's the one that kind of gives you the most control over each of them. All right, so first we're going to create a calculated field for each of our bands. Just going to call these labels. So we'll do sales. This is just going to say if our metric parameter is set to sales, then grab this metric calc value, otherwise make it null. This is the same as saying if metric select equals sales, then sum sales. It's going to be the exact same for all 4 of these. So if metric select equals profit, then show that metric calc, otherwise null. Then for each one of these, I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go to default properties, number format, and I'm going to set how I want to format that. So for sales, I want it to be a currency to 1 decimal place, and I want it to display in thousands. For shipping, I want it to be a percentage. For quantity, I want it to be a whole number to 0 decimal places. Now I'm going to drag that metric calc off a label, and then I'm going to shift and select all 4 of my label fields here and drag those all to label. And I'm going to edit the label, and I'm just going to bring all 4 of those onto the same row. And now, if you look at this view, when you click on either of these, it'll be formatted as currency. When you click on units sold, it'll be formatted as a whole number. When you click on time shipment, it'll be formatted as a percentage. And the way this works is basically you have all 4 of these lined up left to right, but 3 out of the 4 values will always be null. And the null values don't actually take up any space. So the populated value will always, all the not populated values will always collapse, and you'll just see this one populated value. And then one more thing to consider is whether or not the same chart type would be applicable for all your different metrics. So in this case, an area chart is probably a good choice for sales, profit, and units sold, but maybe not the best choice for on-time shipment percentages. But the good news is we can leverage some of the work that we've already done to swap that chart depending on which KPI is selected. So first we'll want to create both of our views. So here's our default area chart. And here's our alternate view, which is like kind of sparkline chart. And we're going to go back to our dashboard. I'm going to drag out a floating container. I like to use horizontal, but it can be either. I set it to roughly the same size. In all of these views, I have the background formatted. I have a white border. And then I have the background set to white with 30% transparency, just to give that kind of lighter blue against the darker blue background. So I'm going to set that in my container instead. And then I'll move this other worksheet out. I'm going to get rid of the formatting in that one since I moved the formatting to the container. And I drag that into my container. I'm just going to edit the size. Make it over here. Now I'm going to take that alternate view that we had built. I'm going to drag that into the container as well. Get rid of this ASCII container. Hide the title. All right, so now we're displaying both, but what we really want to do is just display one at a time depending on what KPI is selected. So I'm going to go back to my area chart. I'm going to create one more calculated field. I'm just going to call it sheet swap filter. And it's just going to say metric select equals shipping. So when shipping is selected, when it's true, we want to display the alternate view. When it's false, we want to display this view. So I'm going to just drag that on the filter, and I'm going to filter on false. Then I'm going to go to my alternate view. I'm going to drag that filter out, and in this case, I'm going to filter on true. I go back to my dashboard. When any of these 3 metrics are selected, we have the area chart. When the on-time shipment KPI is selected, we have the line chart. All right, so the next tip up is those little scroll buttons for the view down here. So I'm going to create 2 new worksheets. I'm going to have one for the range decrease, or the kind of the previous button or the left arrow, and for that I'm just going to do a left filled triangle. For the range increase, or the next button, this is going to be a right filled triangle. Then I'm going to go to the view that I want to filter. I'm going to create a parameter. This is going to be called lower range. This is just going to be an integer parameter, and we want the current value set to 1. I'm just going to display that. All right, then we want to create a calculated field to filter this view. I call this range filter. In this case, the index calculation is essentially just the row number. So the index for this would be 1, for this 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. This is saying if that is greater than equal to the lower range, which is 1, and less than equal to this plus 10, and set it to true, otherwise set it to false. So when this is set to 1, that's going to give us records 1 to 10. When this is set to 11, it'll give us records 11 through 20. When it's set to 21, it'll give us records 21 through 30, and so on. I'm going to drag that to my filter and filter on true. You see now we have just the top 10 records. If I set this to 11, it's going to give us the next 10 records. If I set this to 21, it'll give us the next 10. You see there's a problem here, is that the axis range changes every time we change this parameter, which we don't really want. We still want everything to be relative to the max value. We just want to display different records. And there are a couple different ways you can do that. I like to do it with a reference line. So I'm going to create a calculated field where it's just a table calc that gets the maximum value for this metric calc field. I'm going to drag that onto detail. Go to analytics. Drag out reference line onto table. I'm going to select my range ref line. I'll get rid of the label, get rid of the tooltip. And now there's just a hidden line here that'll stay there no matter what range is selected. So now when I go to the next set of records, you see the axis stays the same, just the records change. And it's because of this hidden reference line right here. Okay, so now I need to create some calculated fields that we can use to update this parameter here. So when I click the left arrow, this arrow here, I want to decrease this number by 10. When I hit the right arrow, I want to increase it by 10. But I also want to make sure that when I click this left arrow, that this doesn't go any lower than 1, because if it's negative, it's not going to display any records. And when I click the right arrow, I want to make sure that it doesn't go beyond the number of values that we have in our dimension. We don't want to be able to click this, indefinitely, even beyond the amount of records that we have. So essentially, we want to turn off the arrows when they've reached either their upper or lower limit. So we'll start with the previous arrow. First, I'm going to create a field that just tests if the range parameter is currently at its lower limit, which in this case is 1. And that's just going to be a Boolean calc that says lower range equals 1. And I'm going to drag that to color. So if this is true, I'm going to set it to almost the same as my background color. So it's like barely visible, basically telling the user that this action is unavailable, that you can't click on this. When it's anything else, I'm going to make it a more accessible color, so gray, saying that this action is available. And it'll be more prominent when we show it on the dashboard. Next, we need the calculated field that we're going to use to pass to this parameter. I'm going to call this range decrease. This is going to say if lower range limit. That's saying if this is already set to 1, then keep it as 1, else take this number and subtract it by 10. So if this was 1, it would set it to 1. If this was 11, it would set it to 1. If it was 21, it would set it to 11, and so on. And I'm going to drag that to detail. All right, now we need to do similar calculations for our right-facing arrow, or the range increase. These ones are just slightly more complicated because the limit is a little bit different. So for the upper range limit, this is saying if, here, let me just show this. So if this plus 10, meaning if we were to add 10 to it, if we were to increase that range, is greater than the number of values that we have in that dimension, set it to true, otherwise false. We're going to drag that to color. And again, when this is true, I'm going to set it to almost the same color as the dashboard to say that it's unavailable. And when it's false, I'll set it to this gray color to say that it's available. And then for the calculated field that we're going to pass to our parameter, this is just going to say if the upper range limit, so it's saying if we're already at our upper limit, then keep this value how it is, otherwise add 10 to it. And I'm going to drag that to detail. All right, now we just need to add the dashboard actions to actually increase or decrease that parameter. So we'll go to dashboard actions, parameter action. First, we'll do our range decrease. Select our range decrease worksheet. Our target parameter is going to be that range parameter. The field is going to be this range decrease calculation that we came up with, and we want to make sure the aggregation is set to none. And we're going to do the same thing for our range increase button. Select our range increase worksheet. We're going to adjust that same parameter, and this time we want to pass the range increase value. No aggregation. Now, one last thing that you want to do, and I've already done this just to save time, is you want to add something to get rid of the default highlighting on these. You can use either of the methods, but I would recommend using that second method, the filter method, because it actually deselects the mark in between each selection. So it just makes for a better scrolling experience because you don't have to click it multiple times to deselect and then select. So I've already done that. So now if we click on one of these buttons, you'll see that we're able to scroll through. And if I was to click on one of these, let's see, we'll go to tables. So you can see when we're on our first page, you can see this arrow here is blue. If you click on it, it doesn't actually do anything. If we scroll to the next page, you can see we've reached the end of our list, and now this arrow turns blue, and if you click on it, it won't actually do anything. Those are all based on those upper and lower limit calculations that we had done. All right. All right, so next up is the instruction overlay, and this one is actually pretty simple. So all I'm going to do, sorry, give me 1 second. Let's get rid of this filter. I'm going to go to dashboard, copy image. I'm going to open up PowerPoint. You can do this in other tools if you'd like. I'm going to go to design. I'm going to set the slide size equal to the size of my dashboard. And the really nice thing about Tableau and PowerPoint is that 1 inch in PowerPoint is exactly equal to 100 pixels in Tableau. So my dashboard is 1400 by 900. I'm going to set this to 14 by 9, and then I can just paste in my dashboard. And I'm going to drag out a square. I'll cover the entire dashboard with that square. I'm going to set this to black. Right click, go to format shape. Go to fill. I'm going to set the opacity to about 20%. You can also do this in the workbook. I like doing it in the image here just because you can see ahead of time kind of what it's going to look like. Then you can just start commenting on this. So I'm going to add another shape. I'll put it over my bands. Make the shape outline a little thicker. Make it white. Get rid of the shape fill. Edit the text to say, click to change KPI. You can do that on all of your sections. Eventually, you'll end up with something that looks kind of like this. Then I'm just going to right click. I'm going to send that black square to the back just so I can get rid of my dashboard image. Click and drag to select this entire thing. And I'm going to right click, group this all, right click again. I'm going to save this as a picture. And I'll save it as overlay. I'm going to go back to my dashboard. I'm going to drag out a floating container. I'm going to set this container to start in the top left corner. So set both of these to 0. Then I'm going to set it equal to my dashboard, 1400 by 900. I'm going to drag an image into the container. Select fit and center. Choose the overlay. I also want to make sure you get rid of any padding. Then I'm going to select the container. I'm going to click Add Show Hide button. It's over here. Click on the caret next to the button to edit the button. So when the item is shown, so when this container is shown, which it is now, I just want to display this X, which is the default. I'm just going to add kind of a gray background to make it show up a little bit more. When the item is hidden, that means this container is collapsed. I'm going to use this little icon button that I built. Hit OK. Now when we close this, we have the little info button there. You can add a little text description, but then when you click on that, it'll show your overlay. All right, and I'm going to do just one more really quick tip. This doesn't have anything to do with interactivity, but it's something that I use in every one of my Tableau public vizzes and a lot of my dashboards for work as well. And that's just using a background image to add a little bit more style to your dashboard. There are a lot of design tools out there that you can use to create your backgrounds, but 99% of the time, I just use PowerPoint. So I created this background here. Again, you want to go to design, slide size, make sure that this is set to the same size as your dashboard. And you can go ahead and style this using custom fonts that you can't use on Tableau Public or on Server. You can add images, rounded borders, drop shadows, all of that stuff. When you're done styling it, you just go to File, Export, change file type. We're going to change this entire slide to a ping. Save as. Save that file. When prompted, click just this one. Go back to my dashboard, and I'm just going to drag out a floating image. Hit and center. We'll choose that background image. OK. Again, we're going to set this to start in the top left corner. We'll set it equal to the size of our dashboard. And I'm just going to right click, go to floating order, send it to the back. Now you can see it makes a pretty significant difference in the aesthetic of the dashboard. All right, so that's all I have for you today. As I mentioned earlier, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more things you can do to make this and all of your dashboards more interactive, more flexible, more attractive, and more powerful. With all of the options available in Tableau, you are literally only limited by your creativity. And with this incredible community, that is very, very rarely an issue. So I know I went pretty quickly through everything, but I will publish this dashboard in Tableau Public and release a blog post soon that you can use along with the video and the dashboard to learn all of these tips and tricks. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you, VizConnect, for having me on.
Hey, Brian, thanks a lot. I think the last half an hour, 45 minutes, I've just seen magic from you on that. That was amazing. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have some time to take one or two questions?
Sure.
Let me just check. I think first question I wanted to ask, just talking about your journey, right? How you started with Tableau and what get inspired to you and what is your learning process, right? Just to go ahead and learn more about it.
So I started with Tableau about 6 years ago. I was actually initially taught by my wife. It's pretty awesome. She had been trying to get me to use Tableau for a couple of years. I was a complete Excel junkie. I thought Tableau was just going to be a passing fad, but the more I started using it, I realized how powerful and just completely awesome it was. So a lot of the learning was through her. I also spent a lot of time on Tableau's website and all the amazing training resources that they have there, through the recorded trainings and live trainings. So I had done that for years, and I had gotten pretty good at Tableau at that point. But I think the real turning point for me was once I joined the Tableau community and seeing all of just the incredible things that people are able to do with this tool really just inspires you to explore and experiment with it and really grow your skill set. So that would be my biggest recommendation for anyone who's looking to improve their skills is to join the community, get on Twitter and start interacting with people.
Great. Thank you for that. And do you want to talk about your blog? I think everyone is asking about your blog over here. Is it called Sons of Hierarchy?
Yep. So a little while back, I joined Mark Bradford's blog, which is sonsofhierarchies.com. So I'll be releasing a blog post about this presentation on there at some point in the next day or two. And I'll share that link. Again, I'll share it on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you. And do you want to recommend maybe any Tableau Zen masters you follow, or maybe some resources which will be helpful for the community?
So the biggest resource for me, I'm sure all of you know Ken and Kevin Flerledge by now, but their blog, flerledgetwins.com, is a lifesaver. There's just so much amazing content on there. And yeah, I've just learned a ton from them.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if we have any last question. And I think just to wrap up, you could just talk about like what is the importance of having a Tableau public profile.
Yeah, so again, that kind of went hand in hand with me with joining the community. Really gives you an opportunity to learn and practice things that you wouldn't normally get to do in kind of a business setting, but you just get a better understanding of the tool. And I would also really recommend getting involved in some community projects. There are a ton of really good ones out there. Makeover Monday, Project Health Viz. There's one that I run with my wife and my friend Vinod called the STG Viz Project. Yeah, so those are kind of weekly or monthly projects where they provide a data set and you're kind of challenged to come up with a viz. You can use it to build out your Tableau public profile, which is great. And usually it's a good opportunity to get feedback from the community as well.
Perfect, thank you. And I think with that, thanks a lot, Brian, for coming and talking to the community on VizConnect. I think it was a pleasure to have you. I think it was some great tips and tricks for everyone to go ahead and reflect how much they need know Tableau, right? So I have been using Tableau for the last 7 years, but surely I will go ahead and test it out all the tips and tricks we have shown today. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Have a great weekend ahead and take care of yourself.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.